have been huge changes in our economic and social landscape over the last year. And technology has been at the center of this change, enabling individuals, organizations, and government to truly navigate this new normal. And this pace of tech adoption is really reshaping every sector in our country, from education, health, the public services to traditional sectors like retail, financial services, manufacturing, tech itself, MSME, and agriculture. And each of us have experienced this firsthand. I can truly believe, given the platform that we are doing this on, that all of us are more tech intense today than we were a year back. And significant upgradation in our tech intensity has happened over the past year. So in this session today, we'll really build on the big question: how can India build on this tech momentum to drive not just business, but societal outcomes? How can we leverage technologies like cloud, data, and AI to define the next decade of growth for the country? The Experts Speak series that we kick off today with Nandan will seek to answer some of these questions around driving the tech intensity for India. So let's dive straight in. And Nandan, thank you so much once again for joining us. Let me kick off this discussion by this question around: what role do you really see in with technologies like cloud, data, and AI playing in driving digital acceleration? And maybe if you can focus on key core sectors like healthcare, education, and financial services.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me as your inaugural guest on this great idea of yours to have this program. So I think in health, education, and financial services, tech has an extremely important role to play. And we saw the digital acceleration of the last year during the pandemic. First, I think the challenge we have, one is of scale. We have 1.3 plus billion people, and we all need to reach them. And technology is the only way that we can reach them. Second, we have a very youthful population that is demanding a better life and better jobs. And therefore, speed is very important because we don't have time, and we have to therefore do things at scale and speed, which is why technologies like the cloud become so important to be able to deliver value to a billion people. So that's on the transactional side. How do you create very high volume, very low cost, highly scalable infrastructure? But equally on the data side, as the data byproduct of this activity goes up, then we can apply AI and big data and use that to deliver better learning outcomes, better loans, better health diagnostic. Everything that human beings do can be amplified with AI and data. So I see a big role for cloud, AI, and data in the coming years for India to really transform itself.
So if I could just even ask you to talk a little bit about the healthcare, education, and the financial services inclusion, because I know three topics you're passionate about. So it would be great to see how you see this happening in these areas.
Well, I think inclusion is the goal in every one of these areas, because what the pandemic has shown us is that the digital divide becomes even starker during a pandemic, because those who have devices get access, those who don't have devices don't get access to all these things. So I think in financial services, India has been at the forefront of inclusion. 1.27 billion people have Aadhaar, 700 million people have Aadhaar-linked bank accounts. India runs the world's largest DBT program. During the pandemic, India was able to credit money into literally hundreds of millions of accounts in near real time using the advanced infrastructure we have, compared to more advanced nations where they spend weeks mailing them physical checks. So that's one example. In the area of health, we are seeing this now with COVID. We have to reach each and every person with a vaccination. So again, India is the only country in the world, thanks to the NHA, has digital vaccination certificates that are verifiable online or offline, which are digitally encrypted, QR coded, and so on. And the National Health Digital Health Mission should lay the foundation for registries and electronic health records, again, for a billion people. And then in education, again, the government has been at the forefront of taking technology in education. The Diksha program, which is part of the PM e-Vidya initiative, has now reached millions of teachers and students using technology. So I think in financial services, health, and education, India has been at the forefront of applying technology at speed and scale.
I really take away these three things that you said about reaching the 1.3 billion, the speed at which we need to move, and then in all of this, not compromising and in fact doing higher quality work, which even the rest of the world will take some time to get there. And it's really powerful to hear the examples. And I guess we need to build on this momentum as we move forward to continue to create India as a global hub for these services. And we can pretty much guide a lot of the world in how to do this and actually enabling this for the rest of the world. Shifting tracks a little bit to talk about a thematic that is very topical at this time in India, which is around Atmanirbharta and self-reliance. And being the pioneer of the IT industry in India, where you and your colleagues really created this big force that is India in the IT industry globally, and also serving all of these capabilities that we created locally in India. It'll be great to get your views on how you think about enabling and driving self-reliance for India through technology.
Self-reliance for India is very, very important because if technology is going to be so intrinsic to our lives and the future of our country, then we need to make sure that we are in charge of our own destiny. And I always believe that India has enormous software strength. The Indian IT industry has done a phenomenal job, $190 billion of global exports, global industry, including exports and import and domestic work, and created a pool of millions of talented people who have the knowledge of the best technology. So I think when you look at all the things we're building in India, whether it's identity, payments, in UPI, Indian homegrown innovations, which has allowed us to use global technology, but in a way that we're not locked in a way that India is in charge of its own destiny. And I think that's a very important requirement, all using open source or software, which is very easy to use. So all that is very thought through to ensure that India is self-reliant. In fact, I'd like to hear more about how Microsoft believes that it can help India in its self-reliance journey.
Thank you so much for that question, Nandana. We are very passionate about it, and you've been a big partner in the Microsoft journey over the last more than 3 decades in India as we built a lot of infrastructure in the country, leveraging the power of the software capability that India has. Now, as we look at this concept around building self-reliance and building our own digital capabilities, we tend to use this concept called tech intensity. I referred to that right in the beginning, that each one of us has increased our tech intensity over the last 1 year, and every organization has also done that over the last 1 year. What is tech intensity? Tech intensity essentially is a combination of two seemingly different things but very connected. One is leveraging public tech platforms at scale and bringing as much of that capability in, and on top of that, building your own IP, building your own capability, which is unique. And those two combine to create our tech intensity. And taking the example of these platforms that we use today, we are using platforms, but each of us have a special way of using them, and therefore we create our own ways of leveraging them, whether we are an individual or a company. And that tech intensity will be central to creating that self-reliance. And now, if I reflect on Microsoft's journey, our role is a lot more in the first one to create that infrastructure of platforms. We were amongst the first ones to invest for data centers in India, so that data which is processed or stored in these data centers is right here in India. And as many tech leaders say, these are now the modern factories where a lot of work happens. We were amongst the first ones to create these infrastructure capabilities in India, and that happened over 5-7 years back. But in the pandemic, we had to really accelerate and build more capacity to increase that self-reliance that India had on this unique capability. On top of that, now many companies are building their own IP, they're building their own capability and creating completely new business models. Two examples, if I may take there. One is, as you know, just like Infosys and its peers did for the services arena, today a lot of new companies are coming up in India in the software as a solutions category, where they're creating solutions which go over the cloud and serve customers both in India and globally. Great examples of such companies are companies like iService or InMobi, who've done that at scale and at global scale from India, and thousands of other companies that are coming up today through the time that we see. These are all leveraging our platform and building their own IP. A totally different example could be something that maybe all of us may have used over the last 1 year, and I'll talk about the success of Myntra in the country. Now, just before the pandemic, in fact, they had migrated their entire infrastructure onto the Microsoft Azure platform. Now, that was just a platform transition, but they basically used a lot of the services, the AI capabilities, the data capabilities that we provided, and did something very unique. They actually had this mission saying, listen, fashion industry for ages had 4 fashion seasons, and they kind of remain the same for everybody. They basically said India needs 52 fashion seasons, one for every week, and each very centered around a pin code or the region of the country, because our fashion tastes are very different in different parts of the country, given climate and the way we live. And they were successful in doing that using this capability. And now that's unique IP that they created. And they provided this IP to all the fashion brands who was using Myntra to actually serve the country, and had amongst the biggest success in terms of their end of reason sale. So I think they leveraged the platform that we provided, but all the IP that they created is all their own. It's self-reliant IP that they created. And that can now become, again, a leader to serve fashion technology around the planet. So let me turn the question back to you and change the track a little bit. As we talk about technology, there's also this question about haves and have-nots. And the digital divide is becoming even more critical at this stage in the country, driven both by access and by capability. So it'll be great if you can talk a little bit about the access side of it and seeing how do we bridge the digital divide if there is a big one in the country.
No, I think, Anand, there's definitely a digital divide, and that has been further accentuated by the pandemic. Earlier, you had a choice of going to a physical school or learning something online. Now you don't have the choice of going to the physical school, and therefore, if you have a small child at home, unless the child has access to a class they can have on Teams, they will not be able to attend. And even when a household has a smartphone, that smartphone, there are multiple contenders for it. So it's not that it can be dedicated only for teaching. If you don't have a phone, you can't do digital payments. So I think all these are examples of digital divide. Now, therefore, when we design population scale systems, we have to make sure that everybody can participate. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The first is Aadhaar. We made sure 1.27 billion people had it. Everybody was eligible. Everybody could walk in and get it. We created an ecosystem of 35,000 enrollment stations anytime, anywhere. So make it very, very easy. And that's why everybody has an Aadhaar number now. Similarly, when we designed the payment system, which I did partly when I was in UDI and partly when I was an advisor to NPCI. Now, our digital payments, we do it for every category. For those people who have smartphones, they can use a UPI payment. And today, India does 2.7 billion UPI payments a month. For those people who have feature phones, also they can use UPI on the feature phone. And those people who have no phones can use their Aadhaar, go to a business correspondent, open a bank account with Aadhaar with an eKYC, and then they can receive money in their account and withdraw their money just using the Aadhaar and an authentication, like an OTP or a fingerprint or a face authentication. So every category of people in this country today can participate in digital payments, whether they have a smartphone, a feature phone, or no phone. And similarly, in the Diksha program of the government, for children who don't have access to phones at home, they can potentially go to a center where somebody is there with a device that is shared, or they can get worksheets printed, which they can use at home. So whenever we design these systems, Anand, while on the one hand, we obviously want to make it universal by reducing the cost of telecommunication, reducing the cost of devices, we also have to design the applications in a way that people who don't have devices and don't have access can still participate.
No, that's a very unique perspective, because I can tell you in some of the other conversations that I've had around digital divide, it's largely been access to devices. But you're saying that even as you design these platforms, at some level, you have to even make that device a little bit of a nice to have, not necessary to have.
Yes. You have to design it for people who don't have devices or don't have access. And access is as important as ownership. So, for example, in the Western model, everybody has his own device. In India, it may be that many people have devices, but they can also go to a local, service customer service center and use the device that is there. So it's a shared device kind of thing, like the old public call offices we had before telephones became ubiquitous. But moving on, Anant, I just wanted to get your sense. One of the things that we are grappling with is how do we have digital literacy? How do we train people on the new skills? How do you at Microsoft think about skilling?
Thank you so much. So I think skilling is fundamental, and it's even in this time, it's become even more relevant for every one of us. I spoke about tech intensity. We all got onto these platforms. Nobody ever trained us, and I in fact spoke to teachers who, as you referred, how they running their classes, and they said we never learned this stuff. It first few months was just learning how to use these platforms and managing children in schools and in colleges. So it's very difficult to imagine how everybody needs to go through this, and even in the tech industry, even in all the tech companies of India, there is an increase in skilling that is required to move from the older services that we were providing to the data and AI services that we are providing today. We ran a global platform and an initiative with Microsoft, LinkedIn coming together to target digital skilling across the world. We've now achieved roughly about 30 million people leveraging and increasing those skills in over 249 countries. And really good to know that 3 million of those are in India. So it's a very big impact in terms of improving the skills. Also, I think it's really about government, industry, and companies coming together. Strong program with the government of India to really think about cyber suraksha. Because the cyber security is a very big part. So training government officials around that, with NSDC working very closely to create more than a lack of youth in the country with digital skills, and also working with NASCOM Future Skills to creating more than 1 million people who are trained on AI. So there are lots of initiatives that all of us have to contribute to, but this is still a drop in the ocean. All of us have to put in our efforts to do this, because we are, as you said, 1.3 billion people. So while these numbers are large in millions, we need to do a lot more. And I believe that we've at least got on to that trajectory of creating digital skilling as a moment.
I agree with you completely. I think both at Infosys as well as in other initiatives I'm involved with, skilling has become very important, and getting people ready. Continuous learning has become very important, and people need to keep upgrading their knowledge and skills because the world is changing so rapidly. But there's one other thing, Anand, we need to think about as we rely more and more on technology and all that. There are a lot of concerns about trust. People collect data and trust and so on. And I know that you guys and Brad has been at the forefront of how to create more trustworthy technology companies. So can you give us a perspective on that?
It's very clear, as you said, people will only use technology that they trust. And it's very important that all these platforms, consumer platforms especially, are built for privacy, security, AI ethics, safety, internet safety, especially for children. So it's very critical to think about this. And all of this has to be built by design, and you can't put locks on it to make it trustworthy. I got a very interesting analogy by somebody I was talking to, saying at times we feel like creating Egyptian mummies where you wrap everything around, but you also need to have agility. So I think it's very important to bring that agility in responsible tech. At Microsoft, we simply work with maybe 6 principles. Because trust is a very deep word. It has many connotations. Security is a big one. I refer to it, which is really around cyber security and what you can do with it. Privacy is a very important one. Your data is your data. That's the principle that we work with, and therefore our policies are very transparent and clear. Compliance is very important because in the sectors we spoke of, financial services especially, each country has its regulations. So complying to those regulations is very important. Transparency in terms of how that data is getting used is very critical. And then now ethics. AI could be biased, and therefore what ethics are we using? I think the simple principle we use is not what technology can do, but what technology should do. So ethics has to really work with that concept of human ethics that we work with. And finally, reliability. We have to depend on these platforms for over a longer period of time, and can we get that? So I think trust is at the core of everything that we do, and that's something that we've got good feedback on, that everybody values this, and therefore we continue to work this. So I'll maybe take the last question to you, Nandan, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the friends from media that we have here. I'd truly like to take your views on technology enabling economic recovery and shaping India's next decade. And if you can lay some light on that, I'm sure there'll be many questions around that as we go forward.
Well, I think technology is going to be absolutely vital and critical to India's economic recovery once we get past the current COVID wave and once we have the vaccinations done. And a big part of that is, of course, all the stuff we talked about, getting access to everyone so they have access to education, health, livelihoods, and financial services. But specifically, there's one very important thing, Anand, that we're doing in India, which is unique, which is the architecture for data empowerment, or DEPA, Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture, which is unique in the world because everywhere in the world, this data is being accumulated by corporations or by governments. India is the only place where, at population scale, every individual and every business can take charge of its own data and use it for his or her own welfare. And we think that's going to be a big part in the economic recovery because the first implementation of this is in financial services. So I think India has a unique data empowerment architecture, where people and small businesses are empowered with their own data. And the first use case of this is in lending. And we think that millions of Indians consumers, as well as millions of Indian businesses can leverage their own data. For example, a small business can use its GST data, its bank statement, its invoice data to get a loan. And therefore, instead of loans going to a few people, we can have democratization of lending to millions of businesses who in turn will create millions of jobs. And that, I think, is the heart of the economic recovery. Therefore, technology is going to be central to the economic recovery.
Now, thank you so much, Nandan, for the clear direction and the ideas that you shared in this session. I completely agree that the biggest change that technology can enable is to drive that similar access, opportunities, and platforms to every Indian. And that is the tech opportunity for India, because we bring that scale, we can do the speed, and we can lead the world in many of these platforms, as you've shown. Thank you so much once again for joining us.